Here's another short ghost story. Credit to this Reddit user for this encounter. Okay, I'm still a bit skeptical, but even I haven't got an explanation for this one. So, I've given in. I own a dollhouse I believe to be haunted by a little girl I call Beatrice. I've seen her before, and she makes noise. But now she's interacting with things I was willing to brush it off when my closet door. I keep her dollhouse in my closet, kept opening under mysterious circumstances, but now she's doing shit like talking, crying, breathing down my neck, pushing me, playing with my hair. What the hell be boundaries? To be honest, she doesn't really scare me all that much anymore. I've had her around for about 6 years, and she's never hurt me or broken my things. I can see her in random reflective things. But there is one thing that's been freaking me out. I can see her in random reflective things, but when I've been looking into the usual things she appears in, sometimes I see something else. I'm not sure if this is the real Beatrice, and she's pretending to be a little girl, or if this is another entity entirely, but I've been seeing a tall, cloaked figure where B should be for a few years now. B is just a kid, but this scares me. For instance, I sleep in a loft bed and I was looking into the reflective eyes of a plush owl I had at the time to say goodnight to B, and instead I saw that thing. To give you an idea of how tall this thing is, my bed is about 1.524 meters, or 5 feet. This was roughly 60.96 centimeters above that. In feet, it would be 6 feet tall, I think. Over time, I've gotten a better look at it, and it's just pale and has no eyes. I'm scared that B is really that creature. Anybody got any ideas of how to get rid of that? What it might be? Or how to get Bia to stop pulling my necklaces, goddammit. I have a sweet little ghost girl in my house who's growing up too fast and might actually be a demonic creature. In the heart of Hugang, Singapore, nestled amidst a row of quaint shops, there stood an old antique store. Its weathered sign creaked in the wind, barely visible beneath a layer of dust. Inside, among the eclectic array of artifacts, sat a doll that seemed to beckon to passers-by. Its porcelain face was frozen in a permanent smile, but its eyes held a darkness that seemed to penetrate the soul. The doll, known simply as the Hugang doll, had a reputation that preceded it. Locals whispered tales of its eerie presence and the strange occurrences that seemed to follow wherever it went. Legend had it that the doll was once owned by a wealthy merchant who dabbled in the occult. He believed that by imbuing the doll with the spirit of a powerful entity, he could harness its otherworldly powers for his own gain. But his experiments went horribly wrong, and the doll became a vessel for a malevolent force that he could not control. As the years passed, the doll changed hands, bringing misfortune to all who possessed it. Some claimed to hear it whispering in the dead of night, while others swore they saw its eyes follow them as they moved through the room. But no one could deny the feeling of dread that washed over them in its presence. One fateful day, the doll found its way into the hands of a young couple who had recently moved to Hugang. Unaware of its dark past, they placed it on a shelf in their living room, where it sat silently watching over their home. At first, they dismissed the strange occurrences as mere coincidences, but as time went on, they began to suspect that something was terribly wrong. Objects would move on their own. Strange shadows danced across the walls, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The couple tried to ignore the signs, but the presence of the doll loomed over them like a dark cloud, casting a pall of fear and unease over their once peaceful home. Desperate for answers, they turned to a local psychic who claimed to have experience with such phenomena. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the doll, and in that moment, she felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. The doll was indeed inhabited by a powerful entity, one that hungered for souls to consume. Determined to rid themselves of the doll's malevolent influence, the couple sought out a priest who specialized in exorcisms. Together, they performed a ritual to banish the entity from the doll and cleanse their home of its lingering presence. But as they chanted the ancient incantations, they felt the darkness grow stronger, as if fighting back against their efforts. In a final, desperate act, they locked the doll away in a chest and buried it deep beneath the earth, hoping to seal away its evil forever. But as they walked away from the grave, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had merely delayed the inevitable. For in the shadows, the doll's eyes gleamed with a sinister light. promising vengeance upon all who dared to cross its path. And so, the legend of the Hogang doll lived on, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. Once upon a time, in a quaint little town nestled between rolling hills and whispering woods, lived a young girl named Lily. Lily was a lover of all things magical and whimsical, but her greatest treasures were her twin dolls, Rose and Violet. These dolls were no ordinary playthings. They were handmade by Lily's grandmother, a skilled artisan with a penchant for enchantment. Rose and Violet were mirror images of each other, with delicate porcelain faces and cascading curls of golden silk. Their eyes, like shimmering pools of azure, seemed to hold secrets untold, captivating Lily's heart from the moment she laid eyes on them. With every stitch and seam, her grandmother poured love and devotion into crafting these ethereal companions for her beloved granddaughter. From the day Lily received Rose and Violet, they became her constant companions, accompanying her on countless adventures through the enchanted forest that bordered her home. Together, they roamed the sun-dappled glades, chasing butterflies and weaving wildflower crowns beneath the canopy of ancient trees. But as the seasons turned and the shadows grew longer, whispers of a long-forgotten legend began to echo through the town. It was said that twin dolls possessed a magic all their own, a magic that bound them to the spirits of their human counterparts. Some whispered of twin sisters torn apart by tragedy, their souls forever entwined within the porcelain vessels of their dolls. Lily paid little heed to such tales, dismissing them as mere fanciful stories spun by superstitious minds. To her, Rose and Violet were nothing more than cherished companions, silent witnesses to her childhood joys and sorrows. Yet, as the years passed and Lily blossomed into a young woman, strange occurrences began to unfold. It started with subtle movements, a flicker of a doll's eyelids, a shift in posture, that could easily be dismissed as figments of an overactive imagination. But as Lily's unease grew, so too did the intensity of the phenomena. Objects would mysteriously vanish, only to reappear in the most unlikely of places. Shadows danced across the walls in eerie patterns, casting a pall over the once bright rooms of Lily's home. Desperate for answers, Lily turned to her grandmother, hoping to uncover the truth behind the strange happenings. With a heavy heart, her grandmother revealed the secret that had been passed down through generations. Rose and Violet were more than mere dolls. They were vessels for the souls of twin sisters who had met a tragic end. According to legend, the sisters had been inseparable in life, their bond unbreakable even in death. When tragedy struck and they were torn apart, their restless spirits sought solace in the only vessels that could contain their eternal bond. Twin dolls crafted by their grieving mother. As Lily grappled with the revelation, she realized that Rose and Violet were not just dolls. They were her link to a past shrouded in mystery and sorrow. Determined to unravel the secrets of her family's history, she embarked on a journey that would take her to the heart of the forest, where the spirits of the past awaited her. Guided by the gentle whispers of her ancestors, Lily delved into the depths of the enchanted woods, following a path illuminated by the soft glow of fireflies and the haunting melody of a distant flute. With each step, she felt the weight of centuries-old secrets pressing down upon her, urging her onward to confront the truth that lay hidden in the shadows. At last, Lily reached the heart of the forest, where a clearing bathed in moonlight awaited her. There, amid the tangled roots of ancient trees, she found a forgotten grave, a testament to the bond that had transcended time and death. With trembling hands, she brushed away the moss and ivy, revealing the names etched into weathered stone. Rose and Violet, twin sisters reunited in eternity. In that moment, Lily understood the true power of love, a love that had endured across the ages, binding souls together in an unbreakable bond. With tears in her eyes and a heart heavy with the weight of generations, she whispered a promise to the spirits of the past, to honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for generations to come. And as she made her way back home, Rose and Violet nestled in her arms. Lily knew that their story was far from over. For in the heart of every doll lies a piece of the human soul, waiting to be awakened by the touch of love and the light of remembrance.
Story number 4, The Doll in the Closet.
Doll for Christmas. On the box, the doll was called the Wispy Walker doll. It was about the same height as me with blonde hair and overalls. The strangest part about this gift was no one could recall who got me this doll, as it was labeled from Santa. Even years later, when I asked my family who got me the doll, no one could remember who. I instantly did not like the doll because it freaked me out. I left the doll in the back of my closet, far away from all my other toys. Years passed and the doll remained in the back of my closet untouched. When I was about 7 years old, I began to play hide and seek with my mom in our home. I decided to hide behind the door in my bedroom, which is right in front of my closed closet door. I gasp when I come to find the walking wispy doll out of her box, placed behind my bedroom door with one eye open and another eye shut. I scream and run to my mom crying. I tell her, "Mom, Big Sis is playing a prank on me and put the walking doll behind my door to scare me." My mother, confused, explains that my sister had left for camp this morning with her class. My mom walks over to check behind the door and there was no doll. My stomach drops and I am at a loss for words. "Maybe you're just seeing things," my mom told me. We opened the closet to check if the doll is inside the closet. It was, but outside of its box, just standing next to it. I had never taken the doll out of its original packaging. I eventually got rid of the doll, but every time I remember... Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Haunted House Experience. A terrifying encounter with the paranormal. When I was 21 years old, I decided to move up north to a small town in Idaho with population of 50,000 people. It was a picture-perfect little town, just about 30 blocks long, kind of like in Smoky Mountain type of vibe for comparison. Anyhow, I was invited to move up there with my boyfriend and his best friend, who was a forest ranger in the nearby natural park. As I arrived, I took a right on Cherry Ave looking for the address on my right in this beautiful neighborhood. I finally came to a stop in front of this Victoria little house. Just my luck, all this beauty, and I get the one creepy house. As I started to move my things in and unpack, I noticed a very uneasy feeling, like I was not alone in the house. Days and weeks went by, and I noticed something was off about this house. I felt an uneasy feeling every time I was alone in the house. A couple of weeks had gone by, and I was working graveyard shift at the gas station, which meant I would be home pretty much all day by myself. One day, shortly after I had gotten home at 10 a.m., I decided to lie down and take a nap. As I slept, I was woken up to the sound of knocking in my closet. Then I heard a voice very quietly saying something I just couldn't quite make out the words. I heard someone trying to open the front door, so I assume it was my boyfriend or his brother. I got out of bed and walked towards the door and waited for someone to come in. It must have been 2 minutes before I decided to open it myself. To my surprise, no one was there. I looked outside for a few minutes and proceeded to go back into the house when I saw a little girl standing in the hallway with pigtails. She was happy to see me and proceeded to smile while also shaking her head side to side. I watched her for a couple of minutes until she slowly disappeared. I turned back around and ran out the house so fast I forgot my keys. I waited outside and called my boyfriend and told him the whole story. He came home within the hour, and we discussed the whole situation in detail. At this moment, he revealed to me that he also saw a small little girl before. He didn't want to scare me, so that was the reason why he didn't tell anything. I went to the local library to see if I could find some more information about the house. I did find an article regarding a young girl dying at that address from a fever in 1910. I'm sure this is the ghost girl I saw. Unfortunately, there weren't any photos of the girl. I only lasted another month before I packed up my clothes and moved back to Nevada. It was too much for me to handle. My boyfriend would eventually break the lease and move back a few months later. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Welcome back. Here is another scary story. This time it's from Rock Island, Wisconsin. Special thanks to this Reddit post for sharing this experience. Rock Island is a state park located at the tip of Door County, Wisconsin on Lake Michigan. It's a difficult place to get to. To get to the island, you have to take a car ferry from Ellison Bay to Washington Island. Drive across Washington Island to Jackson Harbor, then take a pedestrian-only ferry to Rock Island. No vehicles or bikes are allowed on Rock Island. Even though the island is relatively small at about 975 acres, it has had an interesting history. In the early 1600s, it was inhabited by a tribe of Potawatomi Native Americans, as well as a small fishing village of European settlers. The two groups did not trust each other, and did have a few bad encounters that almost led to violence. But for the most part, they lived peacefully together on the island. By the 1640s, the Potawatomi had migrated to other parts of Wisconsin. Shortly after the Potawatomi had left the island, some settlers from the fishing village reported seeing a new group of people on the island. They seemed to be more white settlers, but they wore strange clothes and kept to themselves. No one from the fishing village was ever able to talk to one of these new settlers, or even find where they were living. It was around this time that strange things started to happen in the village. Several animals, it's not mentioned what they were, maybe it was pigs or chickens kept by the settlers, were found slaughtered in the village and seemed to have been used to make markings in blood on some of the buildings in the village. On a different night, a building used for preserving meat burned down. The villagers felt that these things must have been done by these new people on the island, and they intended to find them. But after a thorough search of the island, including the wooded inland area, they never found a single person. These strange occurrences seemed to stop soon after the search, and none of the other settlers were ever seen again. In 1836, the Potawatomi Lighthouse was built on the northern part of the island. After construction was finished, the lighthouse was inspected, and it was reported back that the material of which the lighthouse and dwelling are made are of the best quality, and that the work is done in a substantive and workmanlike manner. David E. Corbin was appointed the first keeper of the light on December 19, 1837. Only 3 years later, in 1840, despite the apparent quality of construction of the lighthouse, David Corbin started to complain that plaster started to fall off the building and some sort of liquid would ooze through cracks, leaving the house constantly damp. Corbin was completely alone most of the time at the lighthouse, and some have said when visiting him that he would stare at a certain wall and sometimes spoke vaguely of the other visitors. In 1845, after 8 years of relative solitude at the lighthouse, an inspector visited the lighthouse keeper and determined that while Corbin was fulfilling his duties, he was acting strange. The official report says that the inspector ordered Corbin to take a 25-day leave of absence to and a wife to live with him at the lighthouse. However, some think that the inspector was startled by Corbin's mental state caused by years of solitude and thought it would be best that he spent some time away from the island. In 1852, Corbin reportedly fell ill and died that December in the lighthouse. He was buried in a small cemetery just south of the lighthouse. The next lighthouse keeper also reported the surprisingly quick deterioration of the lighthouse. Some friends that had visited the new keeper say that he would talk of seeing strange things in the house at night, but he wouldn't elaborate on what he had seen. In 1858, after only 22 years of service, the original lighthouse was torn down and a new one was built. From that point on, the lighthouse keepers were required to have an assistant keeper or a family with them at the lighthouse. No strange occurrences were further reported in the lighthouse logbook outside of strong storms and occasional shipwrecks, except on January 20th, 1876. The keeper at the time, named Betts, reported that he saw 2 men attempting to row to the mainland from Washington Island. He wrote a terrible storm came up shortly after their departure, and they never made it to their destination. Over 3 months later, on May 3, 1876, Betts wrote, "The 2 men who were lost last January have been seen several times, once from Caney Lighthouse and once from Jacksonport. The men were apparently frozen stiff and sitting upright in the boat among a mass of ice. At last account, they were still adrift. There is not much hope that they will be found and buried." By 1900, most of the island's inhabitants left for better fishing areas on Lake Michigan. In 1910, a successful business owner and inventor, Chester Thordarson, purchased all of the island except for the land that the lighthouse occupied in the north. He used the island as a private summer retreat from his business in Chicago. Thordarson is responsible for the unique and mystifying buildings and structures that are still on the island today. On the south end of the island, he built a giant stone hall that has a boathouse on the lower level. A stone water tower was built on the east side of the island, and an imposing wooden gate was constructed on the west end of the island. The Great Hall was used to store Thordarson's immense book collection. He had over 11,000 books, and it's rumored that he possessed some very rare books on the occult in his collection. Thordarson died of heart failure on January 6, 1945, though some have speculated that he saw something that actually scared him to death. I couldn't find any writings from Thordarson, however, that mentioned him experiencing anything strange on the island. After his death, multiple churches and universities were interested in his book collection, but he had willed it to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, providing that they had to purchase it for $300,000, which they did. Some of this history is hard to find on the internet. But there are a couple of binders in the Great Hall that has a lot of this documented. Thordarson's personal papers are housed in the Archive section of the State Historical Society of Wisconsin. All of this history I gave is just to provide a little context for experiences I have had, directly or indirectly, on Rock Island. In August of 2021, I took my first and last trip to Rock Island. After taking 2 ferry rides, I arrived on the island at about 2 p.m. I had booked the remote campsite E, which is a backpacking site that is a little over a mile from the dock. I took my time hiking out to the site to enjoy the scenery, and took a couple breaks just due to how heavy my pack was. I was definitely packed more for camping than hiking. I got to my site, set up my tent, got everything situated, and started gathering sticks and driftwood from the beach so I could start a fire. On my 3rd trip back from the beach, before I got back to my site, I heard a single high-pitched squeal noise coming from the forest. It didn't sound close, but it was such an unusual sound that I stopped in my tracks and waited for a good 30 seconds, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't, so I continued back to my site. When I got back, I began working on getting a fire started. The remote camping sites on Rock Island are pretty well spaced out. Sites C, D, and E are grouped together, but there's probably 100 yards between each site. There's not a real trail connecting the 3 sites directly, but enough people have walked along the ridge between the 3 sites that there's an obvious path. As I was setting some sticks up in my fire ring, something caught my eye and I looked up. Fairly far away, it looked like it might have been at Site D or a little further, was a person running in my direction. My first thought was, well, that's odd, because like I said, it's not even really a trail they were on. Then my mind just went to, there must be something wrong and this person needs help. They got a little closer, and it looked like maybe it was a woman in loose gray clothes, maybe in a hoodie. It was still far enough away that I couldn't really make out any details. I quickly stood up from the crouching position I was in, and just as I did, I heard that high-pitched squeal noise again. It was behind me, and it was much closer this time. This startled me quite a bit, so I turned around to look behind me. I scanned the trees for a couple seconds, but didn't see or hear anything. I turned back around because I knew the running person must be getting close, but now they were gone. Again, I stood there and scanned the trees, but did not see them anywhere. I was so confused, I was kind of frozen for a few seconds. It was all very strange, but I was able to reason it out in my head that it was just a fellow camper from Site C or D that was maybe running to the pit toilet that was a couple hundred yards west of the sites. I tried to forget about it, but it was really just bothering me. I did not like whatever that squeal noise was, and I just felt strange. With some effort, I decided to let it go and started my fire. I had a quick meal and a couple adult beverages, then decided to take a little walk. I hadn't seen sites C or D yet, so I thought I would check those out and see if I did have some neighbors camping nearby. Site D was empty. I did see the path that led from that site to the main trail and pit toilet, so that made me feel a little less uneasy about the runner. I figured it was maybe someone from Site C that took a strange way to get to the main trail by going through Site D. It didn't make a ton of sense because I probably still should have seen them, but it made me feel better. I continued on to Site C and saw there was a tent set up. I really didn't want to bother anyone, but I just thought I would go over with the excuse that I would introduce myself as a camping neighbor from Site E and see if anyone looked like they might have been the person running earlier. I came up on the site and there was a couple sitting at the picnic table. Neither of them looked like they would have been the person I saw running. I introduced myself, and they introduced themselves. They were probably in their mid-30s. They were very nice, and both seemed to be pretty drunk, but a quiet drunk. I didn't ask about the runner or the squealing noises because I thought it might be weird. I wished them a good night and walked back to my tent. When I got back, I had a cigar and a few more drinks. It got dark and it started as a perfect night. The sky was clear and I was just staring up and looking at millions of stars. I felt better about everything from earlier and felt stupid about the whole thing and decided to get some sleep. It was a long day, so I fell asleep almost immediately. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up by a huge boom of thunder. It started downpouring. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped. I love camping in the rain, but I do not like camping in a lightning storm. A pretty big storm came through and I was starting to worry. The wind was whipping at my tent and the ground was shaking from the thunder and lightning. I did not feel good about being out there in a tent and felt very exposed. The storm lasted for about an hour before it became just a light, steady drizzle. I was just starting to fall back asleep when I heard the squeal noise again. I opened my eyes up wide in the dark and just laid there silent. There was another louder squeal noise, and it was pretty close. I knew there are no real dangerous animals on Rock Island. There are deer and porcupines, but nothing like bear or wolves. Knowing that still didn't make me feel better, though. There was just something about that squeal that I didn't like. I say squeal because that's the best I can describe it. It sounded to me like a pig squeal. I honestly don't know that much about pig noises, but that's what I thought of when I heard it. An injured or angry pig squeal. I continued to lay in my tent and started to hear footsteps outside my tent. It was still raining, so the sounds were a little buried in the sound of rain, but it definitely sounded like a somewhat large animal or human walking around. I sat up in my tent and took a knife I had out just to feel better. In my head, I just kept saying, "You know it's just an animal. It's fine. There's nothing in these woods that can hurt you." I listened as the footsteps started moving away from my tent. I just sat there being still, holding my knife for maybe 10 minutes without hearing anything else. I started thinking to myself, "It's fine. It was just an animal. You're being stupid, and you need to get some sleep." I was just about to lay back down when there was a very loud squeal, and it was right outside my tent. It felt like my heart just stopped, and a shiver went down my spine. My heart was beating so hard my entire body was pulsing, and I felt it in my ears. It took everything in me, but I forced out a, "Get out of here." Not shouting, but as stern and mean. Anger, rage, full even. And I could feel its hatred for me. It felt like something very bad was about to happen, and I couldn't do anything about it. I started to shiver uncontrollably. There was a smell of garbage or rotten meat, and it got stronger and stronger to the point where I wanted to throw up, but couldn't because I was frozen. I had never felt so exposed and helpless. I stared forward at nothing, just frozen. And the weird thing is, I accepted whatever was about to happen to me. It was like my brain telling me that whatever's about to happen, even if it's death, will at least be relief. Then I passed out. At least, I have to assume I passed out. That's all I remember until I woke up at about 8 a.m. that morning. When I woke up, I was laying outside of my sleeping bag, on top of it, and my legs were in an unnatural and uncomfortable position. I was on my back with my left leg straight out, and my right leg was bent so that my foot was up against my left knee. My heart started pounding, but I kept thinking to myself, "It was a dream. I'm leaving right now. It was a dream. I'm leaving right now." I packed up everything very quickly and started back toward the dock to catch the first boat off the island. Since the first boat from Washington Island doesn't arrive until about 10:30 am, I had to kill a little time around the Great Hall and dock area. I wanted to get off that island so bad, but I did feel a little better just being out of the woods, and I could see other people. I sat down on a bench a little to the east of the dock and lit a cigar just to give me something to do, while trying not to think about the night before. I was sitting a few minutes and scanning out over the water when I was startled by someone behind me saying, "Hi!" I jumped and was embarrassed when the person came around saying, Sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I saw you smoking and just came over to ask if you had a lighter." I felt like an idiot and told him that's fine. I just didn't sleep well last night and was kind of zoned out, and I handed him my lighter. He thanked me, lit a cigarette, then handed the lighter back to me. We started talking about the usual things you might talk about. He said he was from the Madison area. We talked about the storms we've been having. He seemed to be a real outdoorsy kind of guy, and talked about his plans to move to Washington Island. It was a nice, normal conversation and kind of took my mind off the night I just had for a little bit. He seemed like a pretty nice guy. Then, naturally, he asked me what site I had been staying at. I told him I was staying at Site E the last 2 nights, and he said he usually books that site, but I must have reserved it before him. He said he had booked Site D the last 2 nights. I was surprised by this because no tent or anything was at Site D the 2 times I walked past the site. I told him this, and he said he comes to the island a few times a year, and you have to book a site, but he actually camps at different areas on the island. I asked him where he camps, and he told me most of the time he camps in the East Cemetery, but he also likes to camp in the woods south of the lighthouse. He told me that he hikes about halfway down the Fernwood Trail, and just heads north into the woods where he finds a place to camp. He said that one time he found the ruins of a small log house in those woods, and he's going to try and find it again and camp inside of it. At this point, I started to change my opinion about this guy and wanted to change the subject, but then he asked me if I had heard the screeches in the woods. I took a second to reply and knew he was talking about the squealing I had heard. I told him I had and asked him if he knew what it was. This time he took a second to reply, and I saw his face change. He looked as if he was thinking if he should tell me something, like a secret. With no expression at all on his face, he said matter-of-factly, "A demon lives on this island." Under any other circumstance, I would have laughed this off, but not after what I experienced the night before. He looked at me and must have seen the anxiety and fear I was feeling. He surprised me by letting out a quick laugh. He asked me if I saw anything that night. I told him I hadn't seen anything, and he stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. I felt like he could tell I had experienced something. At this point, I was ready for the conversation to be over. Then, he told me he had seen something in the cemetery that night. Now his face and mood kind of changed again, like he was trying to confide in me. I really did not want to ask the question, but I knew he wanted me to ask it. So I asked him what he saw in the cemetery, but my voice was shaky. Then I could tell he had changed his mind about telling me. He actually looked at me with empathy and told me that what he saw was hard to explain, but if I was afraid of the screeching noises, he didn't think I should go near the cemetery. I didn't say anything right away, but he said 4 words without any context. Keepers of the flame. I looked at my cigar and the ash was long. I put it out and told him I was going to wait by the dock for the boat. He nodded and I started to walk away. After a few steps, he said, "Hey," and I turned around to look at him. He just said, "Don't come back here." I turned around and started walking again. I don't know if that was a warning or a friendly suggestion, but I took it to heart. I was definitely not coming back to Rock Island. When I got home, I looked up Keepers of the Flame as it pertained to Rock Island. I found 3 things that he could have been referring to. The name of the Native Americans that lived on the island, the Potawatomi, could be translated to Keepers of the Flame. The lighthouse keepers on the island were sometimes referred to as the Keepers of the Flame. Then there was also a 19th century cult that was said to visit the island from time to time that called themselves the Keepers of the Flame. I know that hundreds of people visit Rock Island every year and have a great time camping, hiking the trails, and exploring Chester Thordarson's buildings. My humble suggestion is this: do not go to...
I've worked in healthcare for over 20 years now, and I have a couple from working in nursing homes of seeing the figure in black shooting across the hall, and then in the next 24 hours a resident will die, and then in less than a week another one will pass as well. But my favorite story is this. I worked at a very small hospital, maybe 30 beds. It has been around for many years. In the basement is of course the old morgue, and there is one elevator that goes from the basement to the main floor outside the nurses' station. This elevator would come up in the middle of the night randomly, and the doors would open and all the staff would get up to go find the patient who just passed away. One night, my coworkers and I were sitting at the nurses' station, and down the short hall to our right, we hear this TV come on, and the volume is up as loud as it can go. One of my CWs and I walk down said hall to find the TV to turn it down. There is one room down that hall that maintenance has the door closed and "Do not enter" signs on the door. After looking in all the open rooms, there is no other room but the closed one to look in. We open the door. There is nothing in this room except the TV. I walked in, turned the TV, and said, "Stop that. There's a sick baby next door who needs to sleep, so please be quiet." I walked out and closed the door with no further incidents with the TV. I'm an EMT and eat this stuff up. I'm not necessarily religious, on the fence about it, but I've experienced some stuff I cannot explain. I can recall one fairly well. I was in the basement of the hospital grabbing a new gurney as ours was ripped apart from a violent patient. It was 3 a.m. PQ was on the 3rd floor, and it was locked down for the night. No visitors in the hospital. The basement storage unit was packed with stuff, so when I felt my shirt get pulled on, I assumed it got caught on an object. Then it happened again, only this time, I heard a little girl's voice, crystal clear, say, "I'm lost." My heart was pounding. I felt all the hairs on my body stand up, and I called my partner down to help with the gurney. I've talked to nurses, CNAs, and even some physicians who have had weird experiences, especially in the ICU and hospice side. I used to work on a floor back in the day. Had a patient who was being discharged the next morning, only on PRN pain meds, and hadn't had anything mind-altering all day. I go in his room at 3 a.m. and ask him why he can't sleep. He says, "I'm not hurting or anything, and don't get me wrong, I love kids, but why are y'all letting children run around the unit so late?" I asked what he was talking about. He said, "The kids in the dinosaur and cowboy costumes." I said, "I hadn't seen them, but I'll let the other staff know to send these kids back to their parents," thinking to myself, who the hell let them in here this late in the first place? I head back to the nurse's station and tell the person in charge, who has worked there for years. I tell him, "Hey, the dude in room XY said he can't sleep, because some kids keep coming in his room." He looks at me and says, less alarmed than you'd expect, "Oh, the kids in the dinosaur and cowboy costumes?" I asked a couple other more veteran staff and they all had stories of patients telling them the same thing. If they were all messing with me, then half the unit and my patient were phenomenal liars. Had something similar happen when I was working in a nursing home. During night shift, we were supposed to set the tables for the next day. So while I walked into a room to set the table there, as I walk past the TV, it turns on its own, which made me jump up. I figured I'd set the table and turn it off. As I'm walking back after I'm done, I mentioned something aloud like, "Thanks, but I'm done, and I'm leaving," after which the TV just turns itself off. Still freaks me out thinking about it. That aside, I've had plenty of instances with weird sounds, doors opening, closing on their own, patients seeing other people, or shadows in their rooms. Like this one time I had a pre-terminal patient laid awake in her bed at night. When I went up to her to ask if she wasn't tired, she mentioned she couldn't go to sleep while having guests and, apparently, she saw all kind of people standing around her bed. I have 3. The first is our unit was moved to the old pediatric floor for a renovation. It was like 3 a.m. and the call bell goes off. This PT is furious because the PT next door has been banging on the walls. We could hear the banging. We apologize, tell them we will go talk to them. Walk into the room next door. The banging stops, and that PT is sound asleep. Second story, had a patient for a couple months. At my old hospital, we had Susie. We never were a unit working with children, but everyone who encountered her claimed her to be about 8 years old. We usually only saw a shadowy figure or heard her running over the unit's floor at night. Sometimes she messed with the lights, call lights, computers, or our old paper charts. She didn't seem malevolent, and a stern, "Not now, Susie, I'm busy," usually kept her in line. She did not like swearing, though. One of our newer doctors once made the mistake to tell her to fuck off. After that, bad luck seemed to follow him whenever he stepped on the unit, misplacing his coffee mug, just to show up later exactly where he had put it down before, but now ice cold. Charts disappearing. Lights turning off in the middle of him placing an IV, which prompted me to call her out, and her turning the light back on. His chair going down to the lowest setting every time he sat down, even if we switched chairs. The chair would work perfectly fine for anyone but him. We had him apologies to her and it all stopped, or at least he wasn't that specifically targeted anymore. I kinda miss her. Haven't had any as a nurse, but when I was a night shift CNA in a locked residential behavioral unit, really old building, I had a few. Had a resident who was presumably nonverbal, blank stare. Took care of her for about 2 years and never heard her talk once. She was fairly young, 50s and ambulatory, but only a few led her around. One night, I was stalking the room. It was pretty dark. I had thought that she was sleeping. My back was turned, and from the bed, I heard a really low-toned voice say, "He's here for me." I startled and turned around quick to see her sitting up and looking directly at me, pointing to the opposite corner of the room. I was inwardly freaking out, and I just nodded and haven't had any as a nurse, but when I was a night shift CNA in a locked residential behavioral unit, really old building, I had a few. Had a resident who was presumably nonverbal, blank stare. Took care of her for about 2 years and never heard her talk once. She was fairly young, 50s and ambulatory, but only a few led her around. One night, I was stalking the room, and it was pretty dark. I had thought that she was sleeping. My back was turned, and from the bed, I heard a really low-toned voice say, "He's here for me." I startled and turned around quick to see her sitting up and looking directly at me, pointing to the opposite corner of the room. I was inwardly freaking out, and I just nodded and left. Came back the next night, and she had died. Resident who was there for wandering behaviors due to dementia was a huge favorite among staff since he was so sweet. He called me Mija and had a very distinct voice. Unfortunately, likely had COVID at the very beginning of the pandemic before they had the antigen tests available. Was placed on isolation in the single private room on the unit. Supposedly recovered but developed pneumonia a few weeks later and passed away. I did the post-mortem care. A few days later, administration decided that the locked unit staff were to remain separate from the rest of the building due to COVID and converted the private room into the staff break room. It was a plastic table and a microwave. Anyway, I'm sitting there eating dinner at 2 a.m. when the hair on my arm stands up. I get up from the table and poke my head out into the hall and see no one, and very clearly over my left shoulder, I hear Mija. Gave me chills. Can't say whether it was my head or not, but it freaked me out. Had a resident who self-ambulated to the bathroom at night pretty frequently, with a walker and O2. We would listen and check on him when he was done. Another CNA and I were charting and talking in the hall around midnight when we heard him get up and go into the bathroom. Toilet flush, bedroom light turned on. She stops talking and turns white. The resident had died several days prior, and both of us realized at the same time. No one was in the room, but the light was on, and the bathroom door opened. Bonus points. Frequently saw orbs on the camera feeds in the nurses' station, and another CNA claimed that one time, all of the unit TVs switched onto the Hallmark channel really loudly, and at the same time in the middle of the night. I don't know. That was a weird... The Isle of Skye, with its rich... their mind. Yet, amidst the uncertainty and disbelief, there remains a glimmer of hope. presence that lurks within the walls of our apartment remains. As the weekend unfolded at my grandma's house, an unexpected encounter would defied rational explanation. In the days that followed, I found myself consumed by a relentless pursuit of answers, scouring the depths of my memories and seeking solace in the wisdom of others. But as the shadows of doubt and uncertainty the dangers that lurked beyond the veil of reality. Determined to confront the truth, Maya embarked on a quest to uncover hoping for insight into the puppet's sinister nature. Their chilling revelation confirmed our worst fears. The puppet was imbued with evil intent, its presence a magnet for malevolent forces. With no other recourse, we resolved to part ways with the cursed puppet, eager to sever the ties that bound us to its dark influence. But as we sought a new home for the malevolent marionette, we couldn't shake the feeling that its journey was far from over and that its next victim awaited its sinister embrace. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding, we extended an open invitation for anyone willing to take